And so now this morning I kind of get to the final closing portion of this experience that I kind of transmit to combat the grip of nihilistic thinking. In my experience, what really pulled me out of nihilism was the realizing and the understanding that the entire mental narrative that existed in my mind was being formulated out of observing and trying to understand a world that is utterly lost in its own concepts, its own ideals, its own beliefs, all of which are continuously and unfortunately, if we're being honest, vying and pushing for dominion and domination over one another to be accepted as a penultimate fundamental truth. And what I found that really brought nihilism and existentialism to the pinnacle was my brain had no capacity or ability to tell which one of these ideals were right or true until I gave up attempting to figure out what was right and what was true. And in that moment, the thing that I realized that struck me as completely bewildering was all of these ideas and all the ideas that I had and all the work that I put into trying to seek out and understand what exactly made sense and was true to me were wholly and fundamentally irrelevant, because the entire time I had sat thinking and pondering and trying to understand, I was just doing that. I was just thinking, and the entire structure of everything that I had basically collected in my mind information wise, even to this current time period, as I attempt to kind of steer clear of needing to fundamentally track what's going on in the world because I just don't fucking care anymore. What I realized people are caught up in is a nigh on infinite loop, a feedback loop of information gathering and collecting on potential outcomes and possibilities for what the world might be, and people are basically incapable or unable of stopping and seeing that it's just all a thought process. It is all a modality of thinking in itself, and the thought process itself is the actual conflict. The thought process and the things that humans are basically trying to computate and understand are concepts, ideas, structures in thought, and I don't necessarily speak as a devil's advocate. I'm just the messenger. So if I get shot or, called hateful for stating this, whatever, I made it this far. The world is completely and utterly lost in concept and the arguing of concepts. In fact, the world that we inhabit is one born out of conflict over concepts, conflict over ideas. And the ironic thing is, the entirety of the world is nothing but a structure of ideas made into machination. And that's what Earth truly is. That's what is absurd about Earth is nothing but people contesting and basically having a race of which theoretical ideal is going to be the dominant structure and hierarchy of civil order, and all of them end up fundamentally turning into the same thing, which is the polar opposite of what they intentionally set themselves up to be. So all the ideas fundamentally become overtaken by a manipulation of the original concept itself, and then they are used basically to deconstruct and rigidly press people into a modality of life that seeks to structure and organize them no different than characters on a playing board. We live in a chess game. We live in a theoretical construct. Human beings don't even realize that all civilization and modernity is basically a game. If you want to get down to the absurdity of it, that's the honest truth. The cold, hard truth is life is a game. It is a game to the people who run and operate it, that they pretend otherwise. They treat it with a level of seriousness that is nothing but posturing, because it allows them to protect the assets and resources that they are granted and garnered through participating in civilization and basically running and operating other people's lives through persuasion or basically manipulation, that you are required to play the game by a specific decree of rules, and they go so far as to, in modernity, extending to basically putting a price tag on everything that makes you capable of surviving as a organism. That is how absurd this is. And it's not necessarily that life itself is wholly bleak and soulless. It's just that portion of life itself is wholly bleak and soulless. Humans live in a self-destructive concept. That is what nihilism is. That is what realizing the game of life and civilization of modernity is. And you are left with a choice. It is not whether or not you choose to walk away or participate in that. It's, are you going to follow those structures and those ideals rigidly and dogmatically and abide in that, or are you going to understand that at any given time you can drop all those concepts and form and formulate and go about your own way of doing things by your own measure, by your own metric, and you can create for yourself your own life. This is what's absurd about humanity, is humanity tries to press and constrict itself through very hierarchical based structures where they think you need dominion over every living organism. And that's what's absurd about all these ideals and beliefs, is they all end up basically doing this. And in reality, we are not beholden to these things, and the lack thereof of a structure of beliefs and ideals, here's the kicker, will not actually make you crazy. Well, the lack of concepts will not make you a sociopathic individual who will just go out and start doing destructive things. It's actually the attempt to maintain a rigid ordered structure of story in one's mind, a narrative being projected onto the world, that makes psychopaths and sociopaths. It's a projection of what essentially turns into a power fantasia that makes psychopaths and sociopaths. But at any given moment, you can step out of the mental narrative of the storytelling and realize that it's all just a set of thoughts. It's a set of thoughts on a track and a train, and you are free at any given time basically to close the door on that and walk away from it. Now, I know the situation of modernity makes it feel as though that is not the case, but in truth, we at any given time are pretty much capable, by our free will and autonomy, of just dropping what we are doing and deciding to do something else. The reason we don't is because modernity is so addictive. It is purposefully and intentionally set up to be a construct and a playground for your mind to constantly bounce and ping its desires off of. So modernity is constructed to basically be a playground for the most addictive faculties of human behavior, which is probably the reason why it is so bleak and why it turns into such bleak circumstances and de-evolves into such a manipulative construct. Because modernity and civilization is about structuring a hierarchy and order out of the most addictive human desires possible. And I don't think I need to go into detail to explain that. Look around at what modernity is and tell me it's not that. And at any given portion of time, you can just basically give up the ghost and choose to do things a different way. And choosing to do things a different way, no matter what way or how you go about it, basically returns your autonomy back, because you're no longer reliant and dependent on necessarily giving your time and effort to things that just don't serve you. Your life becomes more objectively about what do I need that's going to allow me the equivalent exchange of energy that I need to do whatever it is I'm doing in a given day, in a given time, in a given place. You at any given moment, at any given circumstance, can just walk away from most situations and circumstances that are not serving you. It's just a choice of whether or not the faculty of the mind is wholly and solely capable of making that decision, or if it's going to keep returning to the same addictive patterns of behaviors. That's the hardest thing to understand, and that's the hardest thing to break, is we are addicted to thought because we've been conditioned into relying and depending on thought. We are not reliant and dependent on the faculty of our actual being, which is consciousness, which is spirit. We don't allow that to uplift us and bring us out from the veil of concept. So we go about our lives basically computating and over-analyzing and overthinking everything, and as a result and a consequence, we burn ourselves out. As a result and a consequence of that, we enter depression. As a result and consequence of that, and the continuing forcing of trying to basically uphold all these structures, which are all fundamentally extra, we fall into nihilistic thinking and self-defeating tendencies and vices. And I'm not an expert on dealing with or breaking addictive patterns, but I can say one thing. Changing small circumstances and introducing different factors into your environment and your routine, different things, just small changes is enough to break the neurological patterns and conditioning of heavy vices if you possess these. It takes effort and dedication to saying, I want a change. And it's not the mental faculty that basically needs to change. The mental faculty needs to dissolve. The structure of thoughts that keep you rigidly set on this track are what need to be broken away from. So we need to understand that the mental patterns that we have basically set for ourselves and conditioned ourselves to are going to dissolve, and we need to not be afraid of that dissolving state. We need to embrace what essentially is a more passive, peaceful way of going about life and introducing new stimuli that basically replace the old stimuli that give us something to do. And what you'll find is there will be a sudden surge and shift of tremendous energy in the direction of what is more beneficial to you, whatever activity you pick up.